And as I was kind of preparing this yesterday and working my way through it, got about halfway through it, and I thought to myself, have I bitten off more than I can chew with this, actually? And I had one of those panic moments halfway through preparation, and thought, oh, what do I do with this and all the rest of it? And I've been wrestling with it. But one of those little God moments, which I'll share with you. Had an email from somebody out there last night. It's from Denise, actually. I don't know if she's here at the minute. No, she's not around. But she pinged me an email about something last night, which was kind of on the same lines of something that's on my mind about this. And so I kind of took that as a bit of affirmation, really. So I'm going to go for it. Okay. Now, normally, when we do Sundays and we do services and all the rest of it, and we preach, when the minister preaches, he takes a short piece of scripture and we look at it in a bit of detail, and that's fine. We look at the micro. It's very rare that we try and fit that little bit into the big narrative, which is the Bible. The Bible's a big book, isn't it? Yeah. Genesis to Revelation is a big book. It's what they call a meta-narrative. It's a big story. And very often on Sunday mornings, we take a tiny little bit of it, look at it. It's all good stuff, and we learn all the rest of it. But how does it fit in the big story? And I want to try this morning and fit a little event, a little incident, and I want to try and fit it into a bigger narrative and show you the bigger picture. Because I've kind of got revival on my mind. I've got Chesterfield on my mind, actually, which, I'm wrestling with all of that. Do you want God to move in Chesterfield? Well, that's brilliant. Yeah, we do, don't we? And not just here, but in the whole town, not just in the churches, but in the town. It would be great for people to encounter Jesus, to meet him and know him and see him on the move. And so I want us to have just a little look at an incident this week about revival and how the people of God had got to a place that was not a good place, and something that happened, and the point where revival began. They went down, there's a low point, and they come back up. And I just want to have a little look at that this week, and next week we might have a look at a different one. And I've called this Revive Us, Lord. And those words, fear, reverence, and regard. Have you ever been taken for granted? Often, usually by our kids, to be honest. Let's say that and put that out there. Yeah. Where's my tea? Oh, right, okay, and all the rest of it. You know, where's my best pair of jeans and all the rest of it? I put them in the wash and I expect them. Have you ever been taken for granted? Things just happen because that's what you do, and you've become a commodity rather than a person to be respected in your own right. Have you ever done that to God? Have you ever done that to God? Well, that's what God does, isn't it? And just expect him to do it. And that's kind of the angle we're on this morning. So I'm going to try and move us on to the next slide, except my clicker's not doing it. Thank you, Brian. Do you know what that is? The Ark of the Covenant is what they called it, yes, or the Ark of the Testimony, or just the Ark. Ark simply means box. That's all Ark means, box. But interestingly, in the Bible, when you come across the word Ark, it's usually talking of one of two things. It's talking about that, the box, or the other, slightly bigger box that Noah filled with animals and it floated around. That's the other big box that you read about in the Bible. I want to talk about this box this morning. The Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Testimony, whatever. We read way back in the book of Genesis how God led the Hebrew people out of captivity in Egypt. He took them out. And he brought them out. He led them through the wilderness and he took them to a new land. And he presenced himself with his people. He moved in amongst his people. He tabernacled among them. He dwelt in the middle of them. If you read carefully in Exodus, and I know I'm going on now, but if you read carefully, every time they camped and set up camp, there were tribes that way, there were tribes that way, there were tribes that way, there were tribes that way. And in the middle was the tabernacle where this box was, this ark was. God in the center. He dwelt among them. And there was this pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, and so on. And as they were a wandering people at that time, God was leading them to a new land. So there was a mobile place of worship that was constructed, called the tabernacle, a bit like a big tent with another smaller tent inside. And they had various bits and pieces in there. And you can read all about that in Exodus. But within this tabernacle was this box, the ark. And it was the most important item of furniture, if you like, that was in there. Inside the box was the law, the stone tablets that God had given to Moses. You can read in Hebrews, there's a couple of other bits in there as well. And on the top of it were these two golden cherubim. And in those times, in the ancient times of the Old Testament, cherubim were a marker of the presence of God. Cherubim, seraphim accompanied God. It's kind of a signal. And they called this top of the box, where these cherubim are, they called this the mercy seat. And it was here that the presence of God settled, above those two cherubim. It wasn't God's home. God didn't live there. He wasn't limited to just this place, but this was where he presenced himself. And Moses would go and talk to him there. And there's all sorts of regulations about how the high priest went into that place. It's the holy place, and it was the most holy part of the tabernacle. It's a simple wooden box overlaid with gold, measured about just under 4 feet long, just over a meter long. It was about 3/4 of a meter high and wide. And that's all it was. But, and this is important, one of the big stipulations about it was, this was the holy place. This was the mercy seat where the presence of God came. It was in the holiest of holy places in the tabernacle. You weren't allowed to touch it, okay? Because you were drawing too close to God at that point. Holy, holy. Hence the two long poles for carrying it. Very clever way of picking it up at each end, carrying it around without touching it. So this important piece of furniture is kind of a visible sign for the people to acknowledge the holy presence of God. It helped them understand that he was among them. It was the focal point of God's presence among his people during those years in the Old Testament. We know it's changed in the New Testament with Jesus, but in the Old Testament, that's where it was. And they carried this around with them. They took it into the promised land with them. They kept it, and they kept it safe and looked after it. But over a period of time, it got a bit neglected and a bit forgotten and a bit pushed to one side. Let me roll that. Brian, you're able to pop it on. That's it. That just gives you those dimensions there if you wanted them. Fast forward now about 450 years, and they've still got this ark, this box. They've moved into the promised land. They've been in the promised land, the Israelites, the people. They've been there now for quite a while, good few hundred years, good couple hundred years certainly, and they're there. 450 years on. And we're going to read about an incident that took place, and it's to do with this ark. And I've given Christine, bless her, the horrible job of reading all these names from the Old Testament that she's going to, but she's okay. She's up for this, so that's fine. So if you've got your Bibles, and if you want to turn to the Old Testament, to 2 Samuel, okay, thumb through, you go through Judges and you kind of get to 2 Samuel. And yeah, we're going to read a little incident. I'll move that out of your way.
The reading of 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 to 9. The ark brought Jerusalem. David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went to Baalah in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God, because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day that place is called Perez Uzzah. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed him and his entire household. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has, because the ark of God." So David went to bring the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of Israelites, both men and women. And all the people went to their homes.
Well done. Yeah, you deserve a medal for that, actually, don't you? Excellent, thank you. We'll let you off now for 6 months after that one, I think, actually. Brilliant. That was good. That's good. Okay. Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Brian. Let's see if my clicker works. No, doesn't want to. Can you scroll me forward, Brian, a bit, please, on the slides? That's it. That's the one. Quick overview. Okay. Let's have a think about this for a moment as to what has gone on. I just want to try and fit that little reading that we've just had that Christine did so well. I want to fit it into the bigger picture. If you look in your index of your Bibles, your Old Testament, and you just read through the books that come between Exodus and Samuel, where that reading came from. You've got Exodus, which tells us all about God's deliverance, his intervening in their situation, his rescuing them, him pulling them out of that place of slavery, Egypt, and coming amongst them, dwelling amongst them. You will be my people. I will be your God if you, and then he gives them some instructions as to how to live and how not to live. And with them, the ark is there and so on, and the tabernacle, and they travel around in the wilderness for a while, and then he leads them into the promised land. Along the way, you've got books like Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy that tell you all about those religious practices and social practices. He basically takes a group of people who have lived as slaves for generations, and he brings them together and he gives them guidelines as to how to be a safe society and a people of faith. And they soak it all up, they take it all in, they learn how to be people of faith. And away they go. Joshua takes over from Moses. He leads the people into the promised land, Canaan, the land of milk and honey, where God said he would take them as part of his promise to them, this big covenant thing that is going on. They've arrived. Hallelujah. And then at this point, they're given a choice. And they kind of get it wrong. They kind of get a bit compromised by what's going on in that land. They see the people there, they see how they behave, they take on some of their practices, and suddenly the way they worship God is not as pure as it should be. They start chasing off after some of the other false idols. And by the time we get to the book of Judges, the nation is in spiritual decline. It's going down. And if you read carefully through the book of Judges, you will see that the spiritual temperature, if you like, of the nation is getting cooler and cooler and cooler until by the time you get to the end of Judges, they are in a very bad state. The books that follow Judges 1 and 2 Samuel, by the time you get to 1 Samuel, it is not good at all. Not good at all. The priests are pretty much fully compromised. They're just milking the religious system for their own, to line their own pockets and so on. It's all pretty grim. And it's at that point that God steps in. And he kind of says, enough is enough. It is time for a change. And there is a big shift. And there's a prophet called Samuel who's raised up, and the king who will come called David. It's time for a change. So this whole journey through these books from Exodus through to Samuel has taken about 450 years of decline. The spirituality has taken a dive. The people are not where they should be. The priests have become corrupted. The attitude towards the ark and God's presence has become kind of dismissive. The Israelites know God, know that there is a God. They kind of get that. They know what worship and religion is, and all the other nations around them do something a bit similar. They worship their idols and so on. But what they'd lost was the sense of relationship and connection. They'd lost their intimacy. They were familiar with the idea of God, but they'd lost intimacy. They had confused intimacy with familiarity. It's a danger for us all. We can come to church every week. We are familiar with church and what we do. We're familiar with the words of the songs. We're familiar with the Bible readings. We know how it all works. But it doesn't mean that we're being intimate with God. It doesn't mean that we've got the connection. Yeah? 1 Samuel 4 tells the story of a defeat in battle for the nation of Israel. what happens is the neighboring Philistines they're causing Israel some trouble. So they go to battle and all the rest of it. During this first battle that goes on, the Israelites lose. The Philistines beat them, and the Israelites are shocked. We're the people of God. We're the people of God. How can we lose? And so they have a bit of a think amongst themselves, and they say, I know what we'll do. We'll go back for round 2, and we'll take the Ark of the Covenant with us. And you can read it in 1 Samuel chapter 4, 5. They take the Ark into battle with them. And they lose again. They lose again. And not only do they lose, their priests get killed in the battle. And the Ark gets captured by the Philistines and taken away. The presence of God is lost. And the nation has had this message sent to them that enough is enough. Enough is enough. What to do now? Their priests have gone, their leadership has gone. They don't quite know what to do as a result of this. They've treated the ark as a talisman, as a lucky charm, as something that always helps them win, their advantage that they can play in these war games with their neighbors. When they go to war, they don't even consult God. They don't even pray about what to do next. They've been defeated once. What should we do next, God? They assume that he'll be there. They take him for granted because that's what he does. But on this occasion, he didn't. He didn't. Victory in that battle had been assumed. They've given no regard for God's will, simply taken him for granted and assume he'll fight for them. Brian, are you able just to pop up the next one, which I think is a map? No, it's not going to go. Okay, fair enough. That's it. Brilliant. And if you just follow the red line from Shiloh on the right there, the ark had been kept safe there, out of the way. They weren't doing much with it. They take it to roundabout Ebenezer there, have the battle. It's lost. The ark is captured, taken away by the Philistines and held by them. And the Philistines think, great, our God is better. Our God has won. And they take the ark and they put it in their temple in front of their stone idol. And they go back in the next morning and the stone idol has fallen over. The ark is okay. They put their stone idol back up and dust it off and set it down. Go back the next morning, the stone idol has fallen over again and is broken into 4 pieces. All sorts of horrible things start happening among the Philistines, and they realize that God in this ark business is far more powerful than they thought. And to cut a long story short, they send the ark back. They recognize the presence of God and the power of God. And this is the Philistines. And they send the ark back. And if you follow that red line through there, and it goes, but the Israelites don't know what to do with it. They are frightened as well. Yes, the visible sign of God's holy presence, this focal point, this ark, God's presence among them are gone, and now it's come back. But what do we do with it? We lost that battle. And it kind of gets parked out in the countryside for a long time in this rural backwater. And it's left there. It's kind of been looked after, but it's left there for about 50 years. 50 years. Not at the center of the people, not at the center of their worship practices, just left aside, this ark that represents the presence of God. And then we get to our reading. And I know it's been a long story to get here, but this is the point, and this is what I kind of want you to pay attention to. David has grown up, he's become king. He's king of all the tribes of Israel. He's the man with a heart after God's heart. He's been chosen and anointed, and he's there now. He's king of Israel, and he's beginning the whole process of uniting the tribes together and building a nation, a people, uniting them together as a people, but more importantly, to build them together as the people of faith they should be. God at the center. He's just conquered this city called Jerusalem and made it his capital. And he wants to bring the ark to the center of the nation, to the capital, and bring it there. His journey to the throne so far has been challenging, but time and time again, David's faith and God's faithfulness has come through. And this is the next step. He's just taken Jerusalem. It's the capital now. The ark needs to be there, this symbol of God's presence among the people and at the center of the people. It's the right place for it to be. So he goes and tracks it down in the middle of nowhere, and he decides to bring it back. He organizes some muscle, the young men, and he rounds them up to go and do a bit of lifting. It's like the removals, isn't it? Pickfords and all the rest of it. He organizes some transport, and away they go to Abinadab's place, where the ark is kind of temporary storage thing, really, being looked after, but it's there. All good so far, because after all, this is David. This is David we're talking about. The ark is placed on a new cart, we're told. New in the sense of ceremonially clean. So they've thought about it a bit, and they've popped it on this cart, pulled by some oxen, and the journey begins. But we're told very subtly that the road is on a hillside. And as they go off with this cart on this rough road, the roads, the inclines are there. It's not too easy. There's a bump in the road. Maybe the oxen pulling the cart stumble in this bump or this hollow or whatever. But something happens because the ark apparently is in danger of slipping off this cart that it's on, this carriage it's on. So the guy at the back, and presumably that's his job, he's been put there. Uzzah, your job, Uzzah, is to be at the back of the cart, and his brother's at the front of the cart as they travel down the road. Uzzah's at the back. He sees the ark start to slip off the cart, and he puts out his hand to stop it, and he is immediately struck down dead. That sounds odd to us, doesn't it? Because you think he's done the right thing. He was trying to protect it, but he's touching something that is holy, something that he shouldn't touch. He's struck down dead, and David is he's kind of frightened, actually. He's angry that this has happened. Angry. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Don't touch. He's struck down. He dies there on the road. David's angry, but he's afraid because the Lord is angry. The people don't know the right way to behave in the presence of God. They've forgotten it. It's 450 years of watering it down, and they've forgotten who they're dealing with and how to deal with him. And so what to do? What to do? The ark is parked up once again, pulls off the road, parked up temporarily again. David needs to go off and do some thinking to find out what to do. It's kind of left there for about 3 months, and David goes away. And I'm guessing that David went away, and I'm guessing that he prayed a lot. He thought a lot. He did his research to find out what was going on. I think many other men would have just left it as it was and given up, but not David. We're not told who he consults or what he reads or how he prays, but when he comes back, something has changed. When David returns to the ark, there is a difference in how he behaves, and the passage tells us a few things, and we can learn from this stuff. This is kind of a moment of revival for the nation. He knows that the people need God at the center, but he also knows that they've got to learn how to respect and treat God properly. And we're told a few things, and here they are. David went with rejoicing because of the presence of God. It's an intentional choice to rejoice in the presence of God. God, I am choosing you, and I'm going to be excited about you, and I'm going to worship you, and I'm going to give you the praise and be excited about you, whatever, because you are God, and you are worthy, and you are holy, and this is the right way for me to be before you. This is my rightful place to rejoice in your presence. Is that how you and I come to church on a Sunday morning? Choosing to rejoice in the Lord. And this time, there is no cart, no oxen pulling the cart. That's how the Philistines did things. We don't do that with the one true God. We do it the way he has asked us to do it. And so this time, they put the poles through the rings on either side of the ark, and the people carry it. No manhandling of the ark, no touching of the ark. It's carried as God originally instructed. This time, there is respect, no touch. This time, there is reverence. This is holy. This is the symbol of God's presence among us. There's more than a touch of awe and fear about the behavior now, more than a touch, but there is also obedience. It says that when those were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, sacrifices were made. Pick up the ark. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Stop. Sacrifice. Give God what is due to his name. Treat him with respect and awe. Let's just think about that for a minute. We say the word sacrifice. What did that mean? That meant that they had to plan ahead and bring whatever poor creature was going to be sacrificed, and all the gear necessary to do that properly. The logistics of organizing this took some doing, to bring the creatures, bring the priests or whoever was doing that, and make it happen. And here's the interesting thing about that text. It says when they've gone 6 steps. There are many translations and many scholars that would say that every 6 steps they stopped and they sacrificed and did it again. 6 steps, do it again. 6 steps, do it again. Every 6 steps they are saying, God, you are worthy. You are worthy. You deserve this. This is our place before you. 6 steps. God, you are worthy. God, you are holy. You deserve this. 6 steps. Do it again. And what they are doing is rediscovering the place before the Lord and giving him the respect that is due his name. How long would it take for them to make the journey of 9 or 10 miles to Jerusalem doing it that way? Yeah? But is God worth it? Yeah, is God worth it? And this is a people who are starting to get the message again. They were close, they became far off. They want to draw close again. And they are trying to get it all in the right order and the right perspective. And as they're journeying, and I don't know how long it took, and I don't know how many of these, every 6 steps they went, we're not told. But as they are journeying, David, the king, we're having a coronation coming up in just a week, aren't we? And I cannot see Prince Charles putting on a cotton ephod, okay, and dancing round before the Lord. I cannot imagine him doing that. That's not what kings do, is it? That's not what kings do. They are respected. They have dignity about them. There's a certain way of behaving. And yet David, to him, that's not important. It's not about him, the king. It's about the king. Yeah? He humbles himself and he dances before the ark as it processes to Jerusalem. With all his might, he dances. He must have been pretty tired by the time he got there. He wasn't worried about what others thought. He wasn't worried that his wife despised the indignity and the humiliation of all of this. What will people say about my husband? Look what he's doing now. All David is interested in is expressing his praise and worship to God. That's what he wanted to do. And he is role modeling something to his people. This is the king saying, we worship. This is how we do it. Watch me. He's leading them. This is where we need to get back to. And he does it. And it's a turning point for Israel. It's a turning point for the nation. God is back at the center. The old ways, that old priesthood, they went. There's a new king now, and things start getting rebuilt. And God blesses David's leadership. Sure, he's going to make his mistakes and all the rest of it. We know all about that, and we cover those from time to time. But this is a point of revival. God is back at the center. And the point of revival came by realizing how far they drifted away. It was a wake-up call. A wake-up call. How far they drifted away. Realizing that being familiar with the ways of worship, this is how we do it, this is the words we sing, this is what we do, this is the actions, the routines that we go through. They realized that being familiar with the ways of worship is not the same as being a worshipper. It's not. Worship, being a worshipper is about the heart, letting God in, being in relationship, being close, being intimate with the Lord. And of course, it's about being obedient, doing it the way he asks that it be done. And the nation will start to come out of its doldrums. It will rise up. And David's son, Solomon, will continue the work. He'll build a fantastic, great temple that the ark will be brought into. And the presence of God will come down and fill the temple with this amazing glory of the presence of God, as he did way back in Exodus when he came among the people then. It's a return to the presence of God's glory, and it's fantastic. Would you like to see something of the glory of God? Yes, I think so. I think so. It'd be lovely. If we come to the New Testament, to Jesus, and John, when he's opening up his gospel, John's gospel, he relates to Jesus through this word, glory, the presence of the glory of God. He touches on this idea of presence, God among us, God at the center. And John opens his gospel in chapter 1, and he says in verse 14, he says, the word became flesh. The word became flesh and made his dwelling. He tabernacled among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of God among us, the glory of God risen and ascended, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. He picks up this idea of glory that is now not about the ark, but about Jesus, God come among us, full of grace and truth, the presence of God. What a blessing. But I come back to where we started. Have we ever been guilty of taking God for granted? Have we? And we cry out for revival in our land, in our town, in our schools, in our government, in our hospitals. We want to see God move through the land. And yet, maybe there's some stuff that we need to do. If we do admit that we've taken God for granted as a nation, as a community, as a church. Do we fear God the way we should? Because that's what was happening in this passage that we read. The people had stopped being afraid. They'd lost the awe. They'd lost the vision of the awesomeness of God. Do we fear God the way we should? Have we got a bit too pally with Jesus, our brother, and forgotten that we're serving Jesus, our King? Has that happened to us? Have we taken the nice bits about the grace and the forgiveness and the start again and ignored the bits about obedience and follow me and take up your cross? Is that us? Do we revere God the way we should? Back in that passage that we'd read, they'd forgotten the reverence thing. They just thought the ark was okay to just touch and pick up and carry around and handle, and it wasn't. Presence of God, holy, holy, holy. Have we lost some of that sense of reverence? Do we need to look at the way we regard God? Have we taken him for granted? Big questions, aren't they? Big questions. We moan about this country's, the state of the church, the lack of church attendance, across all the denominations. It's in decline and all the rest of it. There's a very good reason for it. There will be a good reason. Not unlike what we looked at in that Old Testament situation for Israel. Spiritual decline. We need revival. And I think, folks, if we know God, does it not start with us? Yeah, it starts with us. Now, I just think it would be good to spend a bit of time just listening to God, worshipping him, a bit like David did intentionally. But we're going to start off gently. Those three questions: do we fear God the way we should? Do we revere God the way we should? Do we regard God the way we should? And the band and I are going to kind of make this up as we go, but if we can just have some music just in the background, that I Will Worship will be a great one to start with, David. If the band are just going to play in the background for a while, and I'm going to let you have some time just to do some business with the Lord. And then we might move into a little bit of open prayer, but let's be still before the Lord for a while.